I think if we are going to speak about the true self, then we have to talk about the false self, which is what we are usually abiding by or dwelling in. And in Buddhism, it's all about our mind and our consciousness. And what makes one different to the other is whether our consciousness, the way our consciousness perceives or knows things. And there is a basic distortion that appears or is always active within our consciousness, and which makes it distorted, and in fact makes us live alienated from our true self, and which is, well, basically or technically it's called ignorance. But ignorance is a little bit vague. The way it manifests within us in terms of our perception, our thinking, and so forth, is that we reify everything. That means to say that everything we perceive, even though by their own nature, then they lack any kind of true identity or existence, or a kind of true kind of concrete existence, independent existence, then because of this virus somehow that distorts our consciousness, then we perceive it as real. Even dreams, I mean, by all accounts, dreams are fantasy. Nothing is really happening. We don't move from our room. We are just lying in our beds, and then we may be having a nightmare, and we suffer a lot. That means to say we are reifying the dream, and by all accounts, the dream doesn't have any kind of existence, except that it's happening to us at that point. But we are not falling from a cliff or anything. So Buddhism takes it a step ahead and said that even this perception of our waking state, in which then we are completely caught up with reification, we have to question that, whether that reification responds to the true nature of reality or not. The problem with reification, that means to say, to assign reality to things that by nature are not real, is that the moment we reify ourselves, and then also we reify the rest of the world that we perceive, then duality sets in. Because if I exist, then the rest of the world exists. I am the subject, and the rest of the world that I perceive is the object. And that duality is something that is always influencing our consciousness. Our relative self, this self that we operate continuously, is every single instant of our consciousness right now is distorted because of that kind of reification, that kind of virus, so to speak. It has been like that since beginningless time, according to the Buddhist tradition. But well, we don't have to go historically, but the fact that every instant is happening, it shows that we are unable to connect truly with that true self. So because of that then, and because we have that sense of that I exist in a solid way, the way we experience ourself right now is as something really solid and something really truly existing. Even existing in the way we experience it is something that is a little bit apart from our body and from sensations and perceptions, and all these components of us as a person. Then there's a sense that there is someone enjoying all that, and that we really believe it to be true. So when, things are said to us that we don't like, then we feel depressed. And when people, they start to praise us, then we feel very happy. Maybe they praise us for half an hour. Then at the very end, they say something that criticizes us. We forgot about all the praises, and they spoiled half a day, like, because why did he criticize me, and so forth. Why? Because it's difficult to identify that kind of self. But the main thing that I want to point out is that it doesn't really matter. We talk about a self as a person, but actually the main problem is reification. because we are always reifying the rest of the world. And we have to solve these two poles of subject and object, because basically, according to the true self, according to the wisdom of those who reach the true self, then there is no duality. The duality is clearly the duality between subject and object right now. That somehow fades away, because there is no such a thing as intrinsic subject or intrinsic object. So therefore, duality is a fiction. But we all live in a fiction. That means to say our present existence and our present self and the experiences that we have, they may be extraordinarily real. And of course, I mean, we experience all kinds of sufferings, all kinds of problems. Now, in Nepal, this earthquake, just go and tell people, look, this is a fiction. They will never believe. Nobody believes. We don't believe. I mean, it's so outrageous to say that our perception is always distorted, because I think all of us, probably, or most likely, we perceive in terms of subject and object. So I would go a little bit farther ahead, and not to say that we are the true self when we love someone, and then when we hate somebody, then we create duality. We create duality all the time, even when we love somebody, because we see the person, or we see the pet, or we see any kind of being, or rocks and mountains and whatever, as something separate to us. And when you analyze this philosophically, but most importantly, from the point of view of contemplative experience, then nothing can sustain this duality. So non-duality is really something which is quite, it's been taught by Buddha, and I'm sure it also exists in other traditions. But this non-duality really represents our true self. Because what happens is that when all the energy that we need to sustain this fictional self, to sustain the sense that we are so solid, when in actual fact we are not. In actual fact, we're like an illusion. I mean, the whole of reality, by the light of the true self, doesn't have any kind of solid existence. It's just like an illusion, a dream, Maya, or, like many ways it's being said. But we don't perceive it like that. Like in the example of the dream. Now we're waking, but actually this is also like a dream for a person who's already living from their own true self. Because the only way that both selves can be compatible is when, at the level of the absolute truth, you are experiencing your true self, which is beyond duality, which is beyond birth, death, and so forth. In Buddhism, we call that Buddha nature, Sugatagarbha. But of course, I mean, it's just a name. Even Buddha said, I mean, whether I come or I didn't come, or Buddhas come to show it or not, Sugatagarbha, Buddha nature is beyond anything. It cannot be described with words. It is beyond also thoughts. It cannot be described either in any way, because it's non-conceptual. It's beyond our intellect. And yet it can be known. So that is a kind of good news, because, that is our true nature. Always we are Sugatagarbha. We are always Buddhas. Right now we are Buddhas. The fact that we now experience ourselves as a human being is just circumstantial, that's all. And based on a fiction, not really based on realities, but based on ignorance, ignorance of not really knowing what we are. And, but our true self is always there, and, has not been born, it is unceasing, it is unabiding, it has many qualities like that, but also it is perfect in every single way. So all the sublime qualities of compassion, of love, of wisdom, of empathy, and whatever sublime qualities are perfect right now. So the difference between the two selves, the current self, fictional, and the non-current self, which would be, and the always present self, which we don't perceive, they say it's like the two sides of a hand. If consciousness is purified from that kind of virus reification, that same consciousness becomes Buddha mind. Not becomes, it's always been Buddha mind. But at that point, then it becomes aware of its Buddha nature or of its Buddha qualities. Then the path is quite, when we talk about, well, how to reach that level, that is the path of Buddhism. I mean, it can be very sophisticated. For people who like studies, then there can be all kinds of studies and philosophy and years of debate. For others who are more drawn to contemplative tradition, then the whole point is how to approach a way in which we can leave the mind to itself and allow it to start to drop this grip of duality, the grip of conceptualization that prevents it from experiencing its own nature, the Buddha nature or Sugatagarbha. Sugatagarbha or Buddha nature is quite similar when I hear my colleagues here. It's quite similar to what you were talking about or what Thomas Merton says. I was reading in the blurb here. It's a very nice quote. He says it's irreducible or irreducible, I don't know. You have the first person self and then the true self that you experience in contemplation, right? And then these two cannot be compatible, no? Or the word used is irreducible, I think, or irreducible, I don't know. Okay, anyhow, you can read it in the... But he found a way, because he says, for me the sacred and the mundane don't have any kind of difference. And the way to make these two compatible is to eliminate that kind of virus of duality. In Buddhism, we don't believe that there is another way. That is the main ignorance, that is the main problem. And the whole of the Buddhist path is geared in one way or another with complicated visualization practices of the Tantra, using all the potentiality of body, speech, and mind, and so forth, to the very direct teachings of watching the mind and letting it rest by itself. The main purpose is to allow the mind to drop anything that distorts it. Because the pure mind in its own nature, that is the true self, that is Buddha nature, that is what we really are. We have always been that, we will always be that, and we are that right now. But it's only a matter of just seeing it. Now you might think, and here there might be some, that's why we can talk about that, because when you talk about Atman, then like Buddha has a quotation which describes very well also the approach of what that fruition is. And then he says, because one is tempted to think that this is a fiction, that whatever we perceive is illusory, it is like a dream. But of course now we are confused by ignorance, so we perceive it as real. The whole purpose of Buddhism is to destroy that confusion of ignorance so that we see it as it is. But when we see it as it is, it doesn't become real. It's not that Buddha came and said, I am real. You're not, but I am real. It never said anything like that. This is an illusion, this is like a dream, but also Buddhahood is like a dream. The big difference is that like we are all, even though everything is like an illusion, we are confused and we take it as real. Buddha knows that also Buddhahood is like an illusion, but he's not confused and he doesn't take it as real. So then he said this very famous quotation, says, my dreamlike form appeared to dreamlike beings to show them the dreamlike path that leads to dreamlike enlightenment. So with that, then there is a bit of a difference, in the way we describe the state of Buddhahood, because then it cannot be really, it is permanent in the sense that it will never cease, but it is actually beyond any kind of concept. We cannot say that it is permanent or impermanent. I think Vedanta comes quite close to that, yeah. The unconditioned, I think, or something like that.
Beyond speech and mind.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what I had to say.
Thank you.
Good.
Well, I'll jump in here with a few questions that have been on my mind, and we'll begin with something you talked about, Gerardo. A lot of people are attracted to Buddhism, in fact, because of the term, there is no self.
Yeah.
And perhaps had studied some Hindu traditions or Christian traditions and thought, well, I'm not sure if that's right for me, the idea of a soul or that type of a permanent self. So they use a different language in Buddhism, and specifically in Tibetan Buddhism. And so I was curious if when you are talking about a self, are you talking about the same self that they're talking about? Or because there is a difference in language here in the different traditions.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that, because actually I thought I would also refer to that, but somehow I forgot. Because then, if we stay with what I said, that means to say that there is no self at all, and Buddha never said that. There is no solid self. There is no reified I, this I that feels itself solid. But so when you have that realization of the emptiness, you know how it's called in Buddhism, the lack of true or intrinsic identity in the I, it's not that you dissipate as an individual and you have no more individuality. You become a mere self. You have a mere I. But that doesn't come alone. You have a notion is a mere sense of individuality. Of course, I will continue to be Gerardo, but a mere Gerardo. And you will be, I will see you as a mere Jonathan. That is the other part of the coin. I will see the table as a mere table. I will see the whole of phenomena that appears to me as just apparent phenomena devoid of any kind of intrinsic nature. So it's like a mere phenomena. And that opens up all the energy, because we have realized that that self that we were striving all the time to sustain, because it's not true. So truth doesn't need to be sustained, right? But it is not really true. That self that we live in is actually like an assumption that is not really based on any kind of logic even. It's kind of ingrained, comes with our samsaric DNA, so to speak, that we're born, you know, with that kind of structure. So and then we have to kind of all the time support it with, you know, all kinds of things, and attraction, aversion, and all this kind of what we call afflictions. Truth does not need to be supported. So the moment you realize the truth, then all the energy that we're spending all the time to sustain the notion of I, the territory, you know, like with rejection of this, attraction to that, and, you know, all kinds of things to protect that kind of territory, which ends up in, if we look at our minds, then we will always see that there's hope and fear, you know, expectations and fear and or apprehensions and doubts, all kinds of things. These are reflections of that uncertainty. So all that energy that we use to sustain this structure is freed. And that turns into compassion, because you start to see, as a mere I, you start to see other people that continue, not other people, all beings, they continue to experience their suffering as solid and true, as I did until now. And they also experience their existence as suffering, as what it is, and they couldn't awaken to their true self, and automatically all that energy that was being used to support your I is freed and turns into compassion, empathy, love, which is actually the manifestation of this true and genuine qualities, sublime qualities that are part of our true self. No? We just have them covered right now. No? The whole process is to take the lid off, so to speak.
Yeah. Vrajaprana, do you have any questions? Because
I would love to know what you personally, because it's a big undertaking. You know, it's like I've always found the mind, you know, very difficult to have a head-on confrontation with the mind, because it usually wins. It usually goes around the other direction. So what do you find of useful spiritual practice for dealing with undoing the reification of the mind?
Yeah. Well, it's a whole process. I wouldn't say that there is some kind of specific point, but it's a kind of like since I started this path until now, of course, it changed my life to begin with, that of course. But then, you know, the more I understood this, and the more I started to experience somehow, I wouldn't say experience the true self directly, because that would be big words, but to come close to it and to be kind of very familiar with that whole idea. And eventually, of course, in terms of meditation, then you know, you have some kind of experience that it is unnameable or whatever. So you start to feel that there is a coherence with the teachings and your own experience. And I think that then it starts to influence perception in a way in which things become much lighter, right? And much more mellow somehow. And one becomes more relaxed somehow also because of that. I wouldn't say that I respond with compassion and love and everything like the books say, but naturally, you know, like, because things they lose that kind of seriousness that we take everything with, and life becomes much better in that sense. And I feel that that is a reflection of the natural qualities. You mentioned something like that, of our true self manifesting more easily, because we're taking, you know, all the different layers of obscurations and veils and whatever, they're becoming thinner. So I think to a very small extent, I can experience a little bit that you know, the truth of all that we have been seeing, you know, like in that sense, yeah.
I think, Vrajaprana, you said something earlier that really struck with me, or maybe it was Brother Paul, but really about the process of reaching this true self that you're talking about, because each tradition goes at this in a very different way. And it's so interesting just to hear the different language that you're all using. I mean, quotations from Emily Dickinson, and then Tibetan Buddhism, this very vast architecture of logic and different usage of words, and Vrajaprana, the tradition you come from. But Brother Paul, just for those of us that are outside of the monastery and are looking for a way into these concepts, to begin this transformation, to begin this uncovering of the false self, where do we put our feet down and start going?
Well, it's good to start with where you are and have more confidence, more faith in what's immediate. Merton met, when he was at Columbia University, met Brahmacharya, who was, kind of a master at the time. And he said, don't go looking towards Hindus for enlightenment. Stand where you are. Read St. Augustine and people like that. Now, I think if you, it's a matter of faith. In other words, have faith in what you don't yet see. Maybe there's more at hand than you have given any attention to. Maybe what you sort of dismiss as not being really spiritual actually has a lot of spirituality in it that you don't see. Now, you know, in concrete practice, what's that mean? It's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I mean, with your family life, you could start with your family life. How can I change my perception of the people I live with? How can I come to compassion with the people I live with? I mean, everybody's got access to a surplus of information. I mean, the stuff that's out there. You can find all the great spiritual writings just over your little smartphone if you want. But I think the thing to start with is to believe that there's a providence. God is providing the starting points. I don't know what that's going to be, but if you open up, say, okay, send me something, send me a book, send me a word, it'll come. It's going to happen. Now, then that'll lead you to the next step, and then to the next step. So don't make it a big project. Make it a little project, because you're just a little guy to begin with, and that's good. It's good to stay that way too. And, you know, we're becoming littler and littler all the time, smaller and smaller. If you're really, and maybe it's such a little thing as a doubt. You kept talking about how we reify things. Well, how do you release yourself from the reifying of reality? You doubt it. had that little doubt, that little nibble of that narcotics cannot heal. I mean, I think I've got the answer, and I think I've got the right perception of things. Give it a little doubt. You know, a sprinkle of wisdom, a sprinkle of salt, and question even that. And then it opens up.
Same question to you, Vrajaprana, in terms of a starting point.
I'm really in agreement with what Brother Paul said. I think we are in exactly the right place where we have to be spiritually. Exactly. That our karma and divine grace have put us in the situation for us to have our maximum spiritual growth. And in this, I'm a great devotee of François Fénelon, who was a great French mystic. And he was by nature a contemplative, and he was forced to be the tutor of Louis XV, I think, or Louis XVI. And it was a brat of a kid, and he was always being forced, you know, the kid was always threatening him with execution. And then he realized it's like this was the last place he wanted to be, was in Versailles. But it was the place he needed to be, because that's where God had placed him. And in the same way, I mean, you can see it from a non-dualistic, this is where my karma has brought me, this is where I need to be. So I'm a great believer is that we, in a sense, have chosen our family, our karmas, our actions, our thoughts in previous lives, our desires, have put us into a situation where we are, which we've actually chosen. So we've basically made our bed, and now is our way to make that the best bed possible. And if you can either do that the negative way, it's like, oh my God, what did I do to myself? Like, I want to get out of this. Or it's like, isn't this fantastic? Isn't this fantastic that I've been presented all these opportunities to spiritualize my life by dealing with my family, with whether it's my parents or my children or my siblings, or with the community that I live with, which can be quite difficult at times. Or perhaps it's in a particular city or a situation where you think, oh my God, am I the only person who thinks this way? It's like, obviously, no. Share it. Go out, bridge whatever gaps you have. Mm-hmm. Because we are in wherever we in for a very good reason. And our spiritual growth can be found there, that minute, that day, if we just take the opportunity to change our own perspective.
I wonder, though, I mean, families are complicated. That's a great starting point. There is this idea that we need to change our action. We need to change the way we think of people. But sometimes it's not just that easy, though, either. People may have said, I've tried that actually as well. And what about the next step? I mean, where does meditation come in on this? You know, really focusing on this on a deeper level, on a quiet level, because there has to be some retraining of the way we think versus just saying, oh, I'm going to be different tomorrow, because that's pretty hard to do.
Well, you'll never be able to meditate if you're continually battling with somebody. It's like you'll sit down and you say, I should have said that. You know, why did you do that? I should have said that. Then he would have said that, then I could have said that. So, right. You know, unless you deal with the ground reality, your meditation is going to totally suck. Just have to deal with that first, and then you can meditate. There's a saying, never try to meditate when you've had an argument with somebody. Make that up first. Have that discussion. I had at one point in my life, after I joined the convent, my father was so unhappy. He was a good Freudian psychotherapist. It was not his favorite thing for me to do. So he would just make jabs and jibes and stuff like that. And I get so ticked off, and I'd take him out for Father's Day, and he would just be nasty. It's like, I would just say, excuse me, I gotta go, and then I'd go to the women's room, and I'd come back and say, I'm gonna take you back home if you're gonna behave like this. And then he had, I was just realizing how much in my mind was going on, God, man, what's wrong with him? Can't he just adjust? And I thought, you know, you are at least 50% of this problem, Vrajaprana. So, and I thought, and then he had a mild stroke, and I thought, good God, what if this had been the end of our relationship? So whenever we would have a conversation, I'd say, hey, Dad, I love you. "Hey, Dad, I love you." I would never, ever have a conversation without telling him how much I loved him and how much I appreciated him and thanked him for all that he'd done. And the minute I started adjusting my end, I didn't do it for that reason. It didn't occur to me that he would ever change his relationship to me. I just had to live with myself. The minute I changed my end, his end totally shifted too. So by the time 2 years later, when he actually passed away, I don't have a regret in the world. And if I hadn't have shifted my own reaction, that would never have happened. And it would have been I would have been sad the rest of my life that I had not had a sweet ending with my own father, who later became very proud of the fact that my daughter's a Hindu nun.
Right.
So once you do that, everything really goes together. You can't really separate out the ground realities from the quality of your meditation, because your meditation is going to be affected by the state of your mind. So at a certain point, yeah, you can detach, but it really helps a lot if you can just go in there with like that set aside. It's like, okay, I've turned off the water, I've turned off the kettle, I've turned off the oven. Okay, now I can go in there. So we have to have these little switch off points in our own mind. It's like taken care of. Okay, now I can go in, close the door, free. You need to have that interior space free for you to just dive deep.
Is there anything you want to add to this, Gerardo, about that process of getting to that true self, that for those of us that are interested, finding ways to do that practically?
In Buddhism, you
Yeah.
know? Yes, that's the practice of meditation. Which actually, like meditation and familiarization, have the same root in Tibetan. One is Gompa, the other one is Kompa. And at some point, it becoming familiarized with that perception of, well, actually, it depends on the different teachings that you have and the different paths that you have. The most direct path is like the one that bring you to have a glimpse of the nature of mind, or what is, nature of mind is also like a part of Buddha nature somehow, and then to come back to that again and again. And in that way, you become familiarized with that. And by becoming more and more accustomed to that, then all the waves and waves of habits, dualistic habits and everything start to recede. So a little bit is like that. But then I think also the practice also in dealing with the situations of life, then sitting meditation is very powerful, because it kind of prepares the ground to deal with anything that comes. You can't control all different situations in life because they're numberless, right? I mean, there's not a manual saying for this, you have to apply that. No? But then you can prepare yourself, like Shantideva, this very famous quotation that if you have to walk on the world, you cannot just put leather on and cover the whole ground, where you're going to walk. Just put a good leather on the soles of your shoes, right? And that is really the secret of the practice. I mean, you have to prepare yourself somehow, and then you just come with that kind of space that you have found within, and then that gives you much more possibilities of dealing with things and not jumping into a kind of, hatred or kind of attachment, jealousy immediately, or kind of envy. These things, have some ground, to sort themselves out before hitting you. So it's a little bit like that. But also, when I asked Brother Paul, about the practice, I like what he said. We don't do anything, right? Because basically, the whole, and I also asked him, driven by faith, because actually the practice of meditation at some point, before that, when you have realized, when you have already experienced at least some glimpse of nature of mind and natural reality, from then on is the art of non-action. You don't do anything. With the body, of course not. With the speech, you don't speak. And then the mind is left without any kind of interference from oneself. So it's just left by itself. If you act, then there is an actor. So again, the self came in. So, and also, is a very important component of devotion in that path of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, it's called. Like they say always, you can persist years and years meditating on all kinds of things, but you will not realize it. But with compassion, there's no doubt. With devotion, there is no doubt that you will realize it. So in that sense, like it doesn't differ so much. Like in the way, I don't know exactly, I mean, we can never say exactly know the technique or anything, but not doing anything and just letting it be and suffused with devotion, then that is also a way which is very much practiced in Buddhism, yeah.
Another question I have is, David Brooks came out with something really interesting right now, a new book, which is about looking at modern day society and the way we act now. And for example, through social media and Facebook and Twitter, we find ourselves talking about ourselves a lot more right now. There's a lot more self-promotion in modern day than there was before. There was a polling of a number of young people, and they said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they just said, famous. As long as I'm famous. That's, And even doing searches of the word, of different words which symbolize kind of the focusing on that false self, in fact, it seems to be what it is. If you were just to put that into context of what you're talking about right now, do we live in a world in which it is more difficult to access this idea of a true self when so much of our influence and so much of the world is telling us to go in the complete opposite direction?
I'd like to jump in here because I was listening to an interview with David Brooks and I was impressed with a few things he was saying. And I was also hearing some other things about just the difference with women between now and 100 years ago. Whereas young women 100 years ago in their diaries would write, oh, I'm so bad, I felt jealous of this person and I said something mean, I feel so bad. Their regrets expressed in their diaries were always things of an ethical or moral flaw that they felt badly about and they wished that they had done better. Diaries today of young women are, I'm a bad person, I ate chocolate. I'm a bad person, I gained 2 pounds. I'm a bad person. And so this whole emphasis, and I think it's particularly strong with young women today, on just body image. Very, very much on you are good depending on you and your weight and how you look and the circles in which you run. And I think it's soul destroying in a way. Because again, going back to David Brooks, he said there's so much less of an emphasis on the basic ethics of a good society.
Right.
And in the Hindu tradition, you don't get anywhere spiritually, anywhere, without the practice of what the yamas and niyamas, these basic ethical practices. It's compared to trying to try to row a boat that has a hole in the bottom of the boat. It's a leaky boat. You can't do it. So without these ethical practices, you cannot have a spiritual life. Your house does not have a foundation. So I'm seeing so much emphasis now and just on the externals and so little on the internals, which is it's the internals, all these ethical practices, all these things about what is the best way to be human. These are what feed our mind. And our mind is the only thing that's our companion. The body is going to change. The mind will change too, but the mind you can build. The body's going to go downhill pretty it goes south. That's the nature of it. So to have the whole society go in that direction, I think is terribly frightening.
Yeah. Do either of you want to comment on that before I open it up to the audience?
No comments.
Well, we have time for a few questions from the audience before we finish up. So if there's been something on your mind, now is a great time. How about right in the center here?
Thank you. My name is Betty Smith, and thank you for coming. It was good to hear a feminine voice among the masculine voices. My question is this. When I was in the first stage of my life, I thought I knew everything, and that was between the ages of 1 and 15. The next stage of my life, I was pretty sure that I knew more than my parents. And then the next stage of my life, I was very sure that I knew more and was truer to myself, to my children. And I repeatedly told them that they had to do something because I was the mother and I said so. On and on and on. I'm now in my 80th stage of life.
Wow.
And I would like to know whether my true self is as it is right now, or am I going to go closer to it and get closer to it until I take that last breath in transition?
Your truest self was never away at any point. Your truest self is shining in you right now, and it's the same light that shines in all of us. Whether that true self will manifest more depends on your own intention, on what you want, on what you really want from your own life. Considering the fact you're here, I think you're on the fact that you could be doing anything else apart from being here shows what your interests and intentions are. I think just the fact that you're standing here is an excellent testimony to what your own interests are. Because you could be watching television. you could be with your grandchildren. You could be doing something to make money or to bide your time in ways and hobbies that you find fascinating. But the fact that you're here thinking about your spiritual life is a big thing, because most people don't really do it all that much.
That's lovely. I tap dance twice a week, and so I could be tap dancing
Good
right
for
now.
you. Good for you. I'm jealous.
Thank you.
We have a question to the left here.
Brother Paul, is this on?
I think the microphone is...
Brother Paul, tell me, Emily Dickinson had a line, "I'm nobody, who are you?"
Are you nobody?
Can you tell us more about what she was saying?
Yes, I am nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too?
Yes.
Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, though I advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell your name the livelong June to an admiring bog. I love it. So she sounds very much like a monk to me in that. So, yeah, I am nobody, and so it's getting back to that you just cut the reification. You know, you just get back to I come out of, God creates out of nothing, the whole world's out of nothing, and me too. So if you come back to that ground, and you meditate that ground, and your meditation is simply not thinking so much, it's just coming back to zero, and staying there, that's the truth. That's the truth about you. Then everything else becomes relative. And if you don't take everything else as absolute, because this is what relativizes everything, then it's so much easier to handle. You don't take it as the end of the world because somebody shouted at me at work. No, I can say, well, first of all, what makes him do that? And what is the weakness at the bottom of his heart? What is the poverty within this person, this little guy, that makes him want to be the big boss? And often, if you pass beyond the manifestations and put yourself in that person's place, then you begin to see life from his point of view. That's what compassion is. Yeah? So instead of clinging to myself and my perception of reality, put yourself in that other person's position. See life through their eyes. Maybe you find out they had a lot of violence in their past or something. Then you have so much more freedom. And if you can't do that, sometimes, and here's the devotional approach you talked about, I say, Lord, you can take care of this better than I can. and Mary, it's in your hands. And You know, it's amazing how it works like magic. I come back to the situation, and it's like things just kind of cleared up on their own. A lot of problems take care of their own. If you believe a lot of problems will take care of them. And the more I meddle in with things, the worse it gets. The more I'm ready to believe that people have their own resilience. People have their own sorts of, there again, I have to have faith in other people.
Any other questions?
Got one right here.
Oh,
Hi.
okay, sorry, on the left here.
I'm sorry. I just have something to contribute. I think I had a thought. You were talking about your father, and when you said, "I love you," and you took it to a higher level to resolve the issue. And I did the same thing, something very similar with my mother years ago. I was just out of college, and she was disgruntled over something that really didn't need. There was nothing wrong, really. But she wouldn't listen to me. She was very disgruntled, and I finally just said, "I love you, Mom, I love you." I kept saying that, and she stopped, you know, and it was resolved. And I think it was Einstein who said, you can't resolve something on the level it was created, you need to take it to a higher level, in so many words. I think.
That's
So that-
beautiful.
thank
That's
you.
beautiful, thank you.
What you said was great.
Thank you. Oh, we have a question in the back.
I thank you, and I have so enjoyed listening to this conversation. My name is Pat Shervinack. I was struck by the fact that each of you made it very clear the true self is now, is me, is here. My question is, whence the virus? You know, from where has this necessity for a false self arisen? Or from whence has this sort of veil come over us that we're not able to see it? It seems integral to the necessity of being human. And I have a friend who keeps saying, well, why do we have to go through all this? And so there is something of that question, I believe, in talking about true self, false self. I should stop. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't know. And in fact, in the Buddhist teachings, you know, like Buddha never explained, is one of the things that Buddha didn't answer. You know, why does this ignorance exist, and we are not aware of our true self all the time, right? Which is, I think, your question. Why the veils? Why this? Why aren't we Buddhas right now? I mean, if we are Buddhas, right? And in fact, it's one of the things that I'm sure that when we become a Buddha, when we completely, you know, live up to our true nature, then there would be no question about it, and we will understand. But there is like a story of Buddha which explains very much the approach. There was one disciple of Buddha that was asking a lot of questions like these, you know, and Buddha I think he kept silent like 10 times or something. And at some point, this disciple abandons, no? He says, what's the use, you know? I mean, I thought you were my teacher, but you never answer, you know, what I want to know. So he abandoned him. And then at some point, he's shot with an arrow, and he's lying down with the arrow stuck. So Buddha appears to him and says, right now, does it have any meaning to know who threw the arrow, who shot the arrow? Was it a woman or a man? How old they were, you know, which caste they did belong or whatever? Isn't it more important to know how to take the arrow off? So it's a little bit like the approach is always more pragmatic in that sense, you know. In the sense, are we now confused by ignorance? Are we experiencing the afflictions, negative emotions, you know, like jealousy, pride, and anger, and so forth? Yes, we are. Why? I mean, our true nature, our true self, has absolutely not even the faintest stain of all these afflictions. These afflictions are kind of misconceptions, you know, but still we live within the experience of all these afflictions, you know. So then, is there anything I can do, to kind of purify everything and come back to my true self? Yeah, well, there are many paths, I'm sure, but Buddhism proposes one path, and it's much more effective than to start to work on the day-to-day basis than to, of course, it's kind of intellectually enriching to try to know, what happened so many centuries or millennia ago, but actually, like the Buddhist approach is just try to work it right now, and work with your present situation. Now you have a false self and you have the true self. So the whole process is how to discover that true self. And can it be done? Well, then we go to the history of Buddha, He was a human being before he became completely enlightened. So if he did it, well, why can't we do it, no? So somehow there is that opportunity that we have, and to work with the present moment and how we sort it out. Yeah.
The Hindu tradition, there's been thousands of dissertations on Brahman and Maya. Maya being the illusion, somehow the belief that we are not eternal, that we're not pure, that we're not perfect, that we're limited. That is the veil of illusion, or Maya. They say that Maya, or this ignorance, is beginningless, but it does have an end. It has the end when the individual realizes that she or he has been that one true, pure, divine self the whole time. They compare it to, let's say you're having a dream. In that dream, you're being chased by a dog, and the dog bites you and draws blood, and you're running away, but the dog goes and bites, and you wake up and you go, why did that dog bite me? Why did that dog bite me? Well, it's like, it was a dream. But why? Why did he bite me? In the same way, it's like we will our ignorance in the same way as a dream. That when we realize our true nature, we will realize that we've been that all along. We were deluded into thinking that we were small and that we were weak. We were deluded into thinking that we were mortal and that we were subject to fear. But we never were.
I think there are so many renditions of what the root of sin is. The root of sin is the love of money. The root of sin is jealousy and envy. The root of sin is lust. The root of sin is desire. So I say, pick the one that makes the most sense to you and work with that. That's the great thing about Scripture and about the whole, Christian Western tradition and Eastern. There's lots of variations on this question, and it's fascinating. You can, get lost in finding out what origin thought about and how existence we had above, and then we've dropped because we had too much of God. We were saturated with God, and we just got, had to go to find some distraction. So, if that works for you, great. Yeah.
We have to end it here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.